Hi everybody, welcome to our first flipped collaborate for EDU30002 Science and Technology 2017 teaching period 3. Okay, I'm just going to go through the report submission criteria and a few other bits and bobs, and hopefully it'll raise some questions ready for our live collaborate. So I am going to ask you the first thing you do to find out information about this, and I'm sure you all know how to do this now. You click on Assignments in the homepage for our unit and Assignment 1 report. Forgive me, my internet's very slow at the moment. So the word limit for this report is 2,000 words plus or minus 10%. The weighting is 40%, which is actually quite significant in terms of the overall value of your marks for all the assessments you submit. There's 3 in this unit. The due date is 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time, Monday the 11th of December 2017, week 6. So you'll see here we've got all our tabs that we can click on. I'm just going to go through the assignment overview first. So this report is an academic style report. It's asking you to imagine that you're employed as a teacher in an education setting where the management's decided to cut back on the inclusion of science within the curriculum. You're asked, as a professional working in this centre, to write a report to the management team that outlines the importance of integrating science content, processes and concepts for children aged 0 to 3 years of age. So this is a key. You've got to imagine you're working in an early childhood setting with children 0 to 3 years of age. This report offers you an opportunity to articulate the values and relevance of science in early childhood, and you can cross over into a primary setting. I'll talk about that later. So the related learning outcomes for this unit summarise the critical importance of science content, processes and attitudes in teaching young children. Develop and critique explicit and systematic teaching approaches to science and technology appropriate to the content area levels of understanding of the children that you teach. Now, ignore the technology part of this because we're really asking you to focus on science. This is just one of the unit outcomes. So we'll get more into technology later on in the unit. And the other one is investigate categories of science and the content and concepts within them. So assignment details. All right, you have to do this in a traditional report style format. You need to include headings, the following headings. You need an executive summary. Now this is different from an introduction. We'll go into that too. And we'll go into that in more detail in the live collaborate as well. You have to have a table of contents. So you have your executive summary, table of contents, and then an introduction. And this is where you introduce the issue and outline the key aspects of your report. You include a rationale for why you think science is important in the early years of learning. In the body of your report, you have your key points, and you'll need to include points 1 to 3 outlined in the assessment criteria, which we'll look at in a minute. And then you need to include a conclusion, so that is a short summary of the key points, and an essential part of this are recommendations for the management team about how and why science can and should be included in the early childhood curriculum. The recommendations are separate and at the end. And after that, you would include your reference list. There's a really handy report writing guide which will help you in the layout of this and the type of language you will use. It will be third person, so it's a professional academic style of writing. It's you've got to imagine that you're working in an early childhood setting, and the type of report you would be expected to write. You don't often get asked to write these, but you would read as a professional. So it's not a personal opinion. It all needs to be backed up with academic references. So if you click on this, the Writing Your Report, it's a PDF. And so this has got an overview of what an executive summary would be. And in our case, it would be approximately 250 words. So it provides a quick overview or a synopsis of the report, and it summarises the essential parts. And you need to outline the following information in your executive summary. So really, most reports have an executive summary, and it's so somebody can scan through, read the main idea of the report, includes a few recommendations or an overview that recommendations are included, so they can decide whether to read on or not. So the executive summary has the purpose of the report, an outline of the main content of the report, examples and sources or methods of how you conducted the research, conclusions that are drawn from your research, and recommendations for future actions. It is brief, 250 words, so it's a real summary. You would write this last, after you've actually written your report, but pop it in first. And this allows you to summarise all the major areas of the report. So people who read only the executive summary should get the essence of the document without all the details. So we don't want any details in this. Your report will be addressed to management in an educational setting, and it won't necessarily use language such as results, because we're not really doing research as such. Your method, which is a term used in report writing structure, is how you went about gathering your findings, what sources you used. So you'll be using a variety of Australian and international academic literature that's peer-reviewed, and you'll be using current curriculum, government curriculum documents, including the early years learning frameworks and the Australian curriculum, to support your argument. So there's some examples here of an executive summary, it's not the same topic as what you're expected to write, but it will give you an idea of how you would write it. So you've got your contents page next. So you have contents, it's approximately 10 to 15 words. So you set out in the same way as you might see in a book. And here's an example of how you would set out your contents page. So do refer to this, and we're really looking for you to have structured it in this manner. Then you have your introduction, which is approximately 250 words. So you introduce your key aspects of the report. You include a rationale about the importance of science in the early years. A really good introduction is so important in a report. It gives the reader all the information required to understand the importance and relevance of the report. And it should clearly, very clearly state the context of the report and the purpose why you're writing it. And there's an example of a report introduction. And Swinburne have actually used this source, EdMedia, RMIT, EDU30002, but it's actually, they've got some really good academic writing reports that could support you throughout the whole of all of your units. It's well worth having a look at. We're not really supposed to recommend other educational universities for this, but it's really good. So then you go, so you've got your executive summary, your table of contents, your introduction, and then you go into the body, which are the key points, and that's approximately 1,250 words. You look at the key points in the assessment criteria, which I don't want to send you on a wild goose chase, so I'll go back to them in a minute. And yes, I will go back to them in a minute. I haven't got them quite handy. And you could look at the science categories and write a science definition. the application to science and an example of an activity that a 0 to 3 child might do. Now, we don't want you to write lesson plans in this, but a brief example of an activity that a young child might do in an early childhood setting to support the science categories. And the science categories are biology, chemistry, earth and space sciences, and physical sciences. Now, we actually don't cover the physical sciences until week 7. We don't expect you to include this. But the other 3, we do expect you to touch on. So they're the science categories that you'll be writing. And when we say write a definition, we don't want a great big long, all your words used on a definition of what those categories are. Very brief. Criteria 3 is where you display an understanding of the EYLF, Early Years Learning Framework, and the Australian curriculum. Now, I know many of you are studying early childhood and some of you are doing primary teaching degrees. It's relevant for both. I teach prep and I need to know how the development of how children learn and applications for young children. And I also need to be very familiar with the Australian curriculum documents so I know where I'm aiming for them to go if I'm in an early childhood setting and the expectations there. You link it to the learning outcomes and demonstrated elements of science. You make connections between documents, concepts, and your academic reading. For instance, this biology activity meets criteria, learning outcome 3 from the EYLF. So you'll make links there. And then you have a conclusion, 250 words approximately, which is a concise summary of the key points, including your recommendations. So that's in the 250 words. And this is an essential element of your report. The recommendations, I recommend that they're in dot point form or numbered. So, for instance, inclusion of science in the curriculum will da-da-da and lead to da-da-da. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You give a brief example of an activity to illustrate your recommendation and apply it back to the child's learning and development. Recommendations shouldn't introduce new ideas. They should align with the key points in your report. And you need an APA reference list, and that is not included in the word count. Now, I'll click out of this. And then you can go on and submission details overview. I won't click on that. And the assignment criteria. Right. So, you need to summarise the importance of teaching science content, processes and attitude. So the science content is what you're teaching, the processes are how you're teaching it, and the attitudes are things you're aiming to develop in children, like problem solving, persistence, things like that, curiosity. I've lost my place. So 2. Inclusion and explanation of at least 2 science categories. I said 3 before. So 2, biology, chemistry, physics, earth and space sciences. And just remember, physics is not covered in our weekly materials until week 7, but at least 2. And if you're only doing 2, you need to do a really good job of these. Like, it needs to be very clear and you need to have some good examples of how you would support it in an early childhood setting. So, and you also have to have examples of relevant conceptual understandings and learning for infants and toddlers. Criteria 3 is how science is described in the Australian curriculum and early years learning framework. And so, like I said before, although infants and toddlers are not included in the Australian curriculum, it'll strengthen your argument to understand the continuum of science education and the expectations from birth to year 6, grade 6. So it's very important that you do understand why you're doing what you're doing and how it leads to broader context and later learning. And depth and breadth, academic expression. I'll go into depth and breadth in a minute. So the criteria. Criteria 1, there are 1, 2, 4 criteria for this assignment. Criteria 1 is the summary and importance of science content, processes and attitude. That's worth 25%. So for a pass, we're expecting the minimum, that your summary focuses on the importance of science and how this aligns to teaching. So we want to know why science is important in an early childhood setting and that you've completed the key aspects of the requirements. Could be more succinct or include relevant examples. Credit is the same as that, but with more detail, and it includes examples of science processes and attitudes. So I did have something here about processes and attitudes, and I did mention attitudes before are things like dispositions such as encouraging curiosity and wonder and things like that, and processes are categorising and informal measurements and things like that. So how they're doing it. I'll just have a quick look if I've got something. So noticing, questioning, sorting, classifying, analysing, explaining are the processes. And attitudes are like dispositions that are developed or encouraged, such as creative thinking, persistence, wonder, curiosity. So keep referring to the rubric to stay on track with this. And for a distinction, it is including all those things before and supporting literature that focuses on the processes, attitudes and things, why science is important in early childhood. And a high distinction, which is hopefully what you're all aiming for, it identifies the alignment with science content, processes, attitudes and the benefits these have on young children and all of the prior things I just discussed. Criteria 2, inclusion and explanation of at least 2 science categories, biology, chemistry, physics, earth and space sciences. These are all categories from the Australian curriculum, by the way, and you will have to look at that to be able to write your report properly. So don't ignore the Australian curriculum. That's where the science categories come from, and you'll need to be a little bit familiar with that. We're going to cover some of these prior to the submission date in our modules. So, and we also need examples of relevant conceptual understandings and learning for infants and toddlers. So a science category would be biology. A conceptual understanding might be living things are part of the world around us, or categorising living and non-living things. Living things have different needs. There are 3 different conceptual understandings linked to biology. So chemistry is a category, and conceptual understandings that are linked to that could be objects can be made the same or different and can look and feel different, or characteristics of substances can change. Chemistry is fantastic to do with early childhood. It's really fun. Substances can be solid, liquid or gas. Do be very careful you're not making things too sophisticated, because you are talking about young children here. For a pass, we need clear links evident between science categories and developing conceptual understandings. For a credit, we need that and examples to support the understandings, the conceptual understandings, how you might implement that in your early childhood setting where you're pretending, hypothetically, that you work and you're presenting your report to management for. The science categories and concepts are explored with that particular age group, so they need to be relevant and age appropriate. For a credit, some examples outline the importance of conceptual understandings and how children learn about science. And that was a distinction, sorry. As for a high distinction, your examples demonstrate acknowledgement of science concepts, set high expectations for young children's learning, and demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of the categories for teaching science. And remember, you have to do all this in a succinct way. How science is described in the Australian Curriculum and Early Years Learning Framework. Your report outlines, for a pass, some understandings of how the EYLF and the Australian curriculum inform science teaching. For a credit, you have to do that and include examples that demonstrate aspects of science from both curriculum documents, not just one. Don't focus on one. For a distinction, you need to include some of the principles and ideas from the curriculum documents. So that would be like the umbrella, why we're teaching what we teach, based on the Australian curriculum and the early years learning framework. So not simply just cutting and pasting. Do be very careful that you're not cutting and pasting from these documents and that you're trying to synthesise them into your own words, and make sure you reference everything you use too. For a high distinction, we want to see some deep thinking that integrates the principles and ideas from the curriculum documents into your arguments and rationale for your report. Depth and breadth. Now this is a good one. I like depth and breadth. It's easy to talk about too. Your report identifies some of the key ideas and potential benefits of science curricula for learning, and some reference has been made to unit materials. So do think about our unit readings, and in prior units that you may have studied. Particularly I've noticed in my group, quite a few people have actually, this might be their second or third science unit, which is awesome. But do draw on those other readings from other units. And recommendations have been included in your report. You will not get a pass in this criteria if you do not include recommendations. It's essential. For a credit, all those aspects of the report are completed, ideas flow seamlessly, and you clearly identify contributing factors and effects. Relevant and clear recommendations are included. For a distinction, clear rationale, supporting literature, recommendations that display a high level of understanding of science pedagogy, which is teaching, and practice. For a high distinction, all of those elements have been completed and you demonstrate a high level of pedagogical understandings. Your recommendations include a deep understanding of the importance of integrating science content in an early childhood context. Now, depth and breadth. Breadth is how wide your discussion is. So, the different things you're including in your report to support your argument as to why science teaching is important in your early learning centre for management. Depth is how far you go into each of the topics that you've chosen to discuss. So really, you've got to be careful. You've got to balance it well. You can have a very broad discussion where you touch on lots of facets of a topic, but you need to be able to delve more deeply into some parts. And you need to support this with academic literature. So this is the depth and breadth. You cannot write personal opinions. You need to have everything supported with an academic reading. So, make sure you include academic references to support your argument. So you go into a few topics for discussion that you think are important in a bit of depth. Not too much given the word count. So that's the thing. You can't focus on like one area and just write your whole report about why that's important, because there will not be the breadth there. We want both. So likewise, if you concentrate heavily on one aspect of a topic, you may miss out on other important parts of the overall picture and purpose of the report. And this all needs to be backed up by academic references. So go to Swinburne Library, go to our unit materials, prior unit materials. Science links in with so many things. There are other wonderful readings that aren't just simply specific to science that will support your discussion. And Google Scholar is a good one too. So academic expression. We need to see that your report is satisfactorily structured, easy to read. Please proofread. Grammarly is a good thing to check. I have noticed a couple of students have used things like this and still there's some funny areas. I would say read it aloud. That's a really good way of working out if it makes sense and it flows well and where you might need to fix things up. also get a friend to read it, and you could submit a report in our student portal for checking too. So, you know, of course, there are often minor errors or inconsistencies with grammar, but you'll still pass with this. It's only worth 10% too, but we do, it really, I know it's only worth 10%, but as an ELA, it's really hard to get past poor grammar and poor spelling. Even if your information's wonderful, it's very, very hard. It makes it hard to read. And it affects all the other aspects of the criteria. So it's not just the expression that you might lose marks on for that. So you and also need to really make sure you do your APA referencing correctly, and you can get more information on referencing and all of those things if you go into the student portal. Oh, there was one more thing I wanted to talk about. Oh, no, I won't. I'll leave it. So if you go into there's a referencing guide, and the Australian curriculum can be a bit tricky to reference because it's always being updated. Just check with your ELA if you're not sure, but definitely go into the referencing guide and check that out. That'll help you. So you go into assignment support and you'll end up in your student portal. I sounded like Darth Vader, sorry about that. Click on study resources. There's heaps of really good things here. I really highly recommend that you use it. Academic practice. You can click on referencing, research, plagiarism, and this is where you can do an originality report to check. Please, please don't just take big chunks of other people's words, and if you do reference it correctly as quotes, but we want to see you synthesising the information, or that's, you know, when you use multiple sources and write it in your own words, and yeah, we just want to see you put things in your own words basically, but referencing your source. Study skills and support, there's all sorts of things here, and here's your essay draft review service. You can access that, which is really good. There's academic writing things. There's a report writing one here. It's called a Stylish report. Stylish is the name of a hairdressing salon. And whilst it's a little bit, it's far more in depth, it's more like a business report, it will give you some helpful pointers too. We're going to be putting up a Padlet in the next few days it'll be like a little one-stop shop. We'll be adding to it all the time for with resources and little helpful hints. We'll put our collaborate links there, collaborate slides, things like that. If there's anything you think you need, contact your ELA. Do go on to your group's Q&A, question and answer for your report, assignment 1, and I hope I haven't left too much out. And hopefully we'll have a quite a good interactive live collaborate now that I've gone through the assessment criteria, and we can get into more the nuts and bolts of how to write your report in that. Thanks, guys. Oh, I was horrified. I thought I hadn't recorded all of that. Excellent, I have. See you at the live collaborate. Bye.